Coming on next, Tom Cruise and Craig T. Nelson star in the story of a young man who dreams of winning a football scholarship and a coach who may stop him. All the right moves.
Coming on next, an exceptionally good documentary that was 4 years in the making. Africa's wildest inhabitants and animals are beautiful people. Wonderful adventure story of Phineas Fogg's travels throughout the globe in the animated Around the World in 80 days. Coming on next, an exciting commando film starring Australia's Mel Gibson. It's World War II, and 5 men are Attack Force Z.
Coming on next, a cast of crazies perform comedy sketches on everything from ballet to toys. In this zany hour, stay tuned for a Cheeseball Special. Coming on next, 5 tales of terror and shocks from the imagination of the master of horror himself, Stephen King. Stay tuned for Creepshow.
Coming on next, high adventure and feats of magic surround the brave medieval knight who becomes the Dragonslayer. Coming on next, it's the adult game show where everything goes. Coming on next, it's the adult game show that puts spice into quiz programs. Stay tuned as everything goes. Coming on next, terror and violence stalk the unsuspecting as an innocent summer camp becomes the setting for Friday the 13th, Part 2. Coming on next, science fiction suspense as the crew of a spaceship comes face to face with horror in the galaxy of terror. Coming on next, Ryan O'Neal gets in a lot of trouble when he tries to outsmart Omar Sharif and get away with a fortune in emeralds known as green ice.
Coming on next, Danny Kaye stars in a fairy tale about the great fairy tale teller. Stay tuned for the classic Goldwyn musical for all ages, Hans Christian Andersen. Coming on next, Glenn Ford narrates the hilarious documentary of comedy on film from the silent days to the present, with W.C. Fields, Charlie Chaplin, and many more of the Hollywood Clowns.
Coming on next, an old nag bound for the glue factory is saved as the neighborhood children go to bat for a horse called Jester. Coming on next, the Boo-Boo-Padoop Girl's brand new animated adventure as she strikes a blow for liberation in Hurray for Betty Boop.
Coming on next, take a look behind the scenes and at the history of America's favorite pastime. Stay tuned for Inside Baseball.
Coming on next, guests will speak candidly on difficult subjects when real people talk about real concerns on The Intimacy File.
Coming on next, a bevy of stars have a great time spoofing the fashion industry and themselves in Jane Fonda's Celebrity Comedy Fashion Show. Coming on next, a funny show with some improbable hosts. You've never seen anything like the content of these likely stories. Coming on next, a funny show with some improbable hosts. You've never seen anything like the content of those likely stories. Coming on next, comedy as the groom promises his bride that he's through fooling around, but he can't resist the temptation of a little sex. Coming on next, the continuing story of modern love, romance, courtship, and heartbreak. It's Loving Friends and Perfect Couples. Coming on next, Burt Reynolds, Liza Minnelli, and Gene Hackman star as a wild and wacky menage a trois of Prohibition rum runners in Lucky Lady. Coming on next, a comedy feature about two cab drivers who find the script to a wild motion picture and become the mad movie makers. Coming on next, Geraldine Fitzgerald is the high-spirited grandmother of a troubled young Australian man at the turn of the century in The Mango Tree.
Kirk Douglas stars in the compelling story of a young man and his quest for the great wild stallion and the hand of the woman he loves in the award-winning The Man from Snowy River.
Coming up next, Steve Martin is a mad brain surgeon whose screwball surgery will keep you in stitches. The man with two brains.
Next, a showcase of the most popular musical groups performing their hit songs. Stay tuned for the all-star lineup of Music on Video. Coming on next, rugged Robert Culp and desirable Samantha Egger star in the heartbreaking drama A Name for Evil. Coming on next, exciting action-packed professional basketball highlights from the archives of the National Basketball Association, the NBA Report. Coming on next, trouble at the North Pole. An expensive valve breaks on Santa's boiler. It means there's nearly no Christmas. Coming on next, on TV's Adults Only Theater, a beautiful female private eye goes on assignment to find a missing fun girl in Never So Deep. Coming on next, originating in a San Francisco nightery, it's a series of the country's best comics from the Other Cafe's Comedy Showcase.
Coming on next, Matt Dillon, Tom Cruise, and Rob Lowe star in the story of the rivalry between a gang of small-town greasers and their rival gang, the Rich Kids, The Outsiders.
Coming on next, a tough film about a hard life doing time in the big house. Only the strongest and most clever survive in Penitentiary 2. on next, two lonely old men get ready for Christmas with an imaginative surprise for a visiting daughter in a piece of cake.
Coming on next, preschoolers will love this award-winning variety series mixing puppet doll and live-action features which entertain and inform. Just enter the polka dot door.
Coming on next, when father leaves town, the maid seduces the young heir while the chauffeur plans blackmail in Private Lessons. Coming on next, the Rock and Roll Magazine of the Year, visiting pop music stars in concert and behind the scenes. It's Rock on TV. Coming on next, the Rock and Roll Magazine of the Year, visiting pop music stars in concert and behind the scenes. It's Rock on TV.
Two-bit crooks who find themselves the adopted family of a 6-year-old. SAVANNAH smiles.
Coming on next, a magical seal steps ashore transformed into a man to tell the human race what pollution is doing to the planet. Stay tuned for the delightful fantasy, SELKIE the Seal.
Coming on next, a small-town sheriff is outmatched when he is confronted by a psychotic killer that's indestructible in Silent Rage. Coming on next, Danny Kaye is featured in a star-studded musical that traces the history of jazz. America's greatest musicians appear in A Song is Born. And of murder. Coming on next, a chilling horror story. A little child watches as her mother is murdered, but that's where the terror begins. A mysterious kidnapper and a beautiful reporter prove that a stranger is watching. Coming on next, a frightening portrayal of the school campus. There's a lot to learn if you can avoid becoming one of the student bodies. Coming on next, a classic film from the RKO years. Katharine Hepburn masquerades as a man, but she's really Sylvia Scarlett. Coming on next, George C. Scott and Timothy Hutton star in a film about a military school seized by the cadets and turned into an armed camp, TAPS.
Coming on next, Martin Sheen, Bruce Dern, Stacy Keach, and Robert Mitchum reunite after 25 years, learning about each other's lives and celebrating that championship season.
Coming on next, 6 little men escape from the Supreme Maker for a series of adventures in different historical times. They are the Time Bandits. Coming on next, a marvelous nature film that includes wonderful scenery and a fabulous array of animals from the vanishing wilderness.
Coming on next, Mel Gibson and Sigourney Weaver star in the story of an Australian journalist in the middle of the 1965 upheaval in Indonesia. The year of living dangerously.